Okay, so some announcements. I assigned the homework 4. I remarked on Piazza that it is a mix of list view and web view. Okay, so it's theoretically not difficult, but you need to put together various pieces. So in practice, it's more time consuming than homeworks 2 or 3. That really did not require a very large amount of new code. Here, the code you really have to invent from scratch is not very much. But you have to put all the various pieces together to work, and this can be a little bit tricky. So I would like to encourage you to start work on it as soon as possible, okay? The problem is not so much that there is some big, very difficult thing that you cannot do, but the problem might be that while trying to put together these various pieces of code, you have somehow some glitch, and so you cannot make it all work together, or you get some funny errors that you don't know what they are, etc., etc. So it's more, the unknown of just putting together the code in the right way, okay? I don't know if you have already had a chance to look at it, but the homework essentially calls for you doing an HTTP JSON call, a GET call, actually, simply. This will give you back some JSON that is, a dictionary, but there is only one field that is called something like a news sites or news list or something like that, okay? In that, there is a list, so you have to use the JSON array method, to decode the list. I think it's well documented, these methods of JSON object, okay? But so you get the list. It's a list of dictionaries. Now you have understood sort of that in JSON you have dictionaries and lists, and then the basic types. Now that's what JSON is about, essentially. So in each element of the list is a dictionary that contains a title, subtitle, and URL of news sites. So you have to present the news sites in a list. For example, I don't know, the New York Times, like old New York newspaper, whatever would be the subtitle. Okay, I'm inventing the subtitles just to give you some exercise, okay? And so you display this list that is variable length, and if it's too long, a list view will take care of making it scrollable automatically. And then when you touch an element of the list, you are sent to another display that loads a web view where you can navigate the newspaper site, okay? I plan, but I haven't done it yet, to give you some sort of simpler newspapers for debugging, because unfortunately I know that real newspaper sites are very complex. So I think it's okay for you to develop, but not for grading. Real newspaper sites redirect you to the mobile version and do a lot of funny stuff. And I don't want that to interfere that with your app. I think it's good if you look at those phenomena while you develop your code, but for grading, I will give you a different set of sites that are simpler. And so I still have to write the code that generates these websites automatically, essentially, right? With fake text in them, so that you can, test the applications in a more controlled way. But so. When you navigate the newspaper, you can click on the various links. If there are links to the same newspaper, they open in the same web view. Otherwise, you say that you don't handle it, and you let Android propose which browser to use for opening that URL, essentially. What else? Yeah, there is not so much else. You have sample code for everything, but again, the challenges will be to put it together in the right way, to display the right kind of list view elements, and to tie them in with the right listener for clicks that produces the intent to go to the second activity, and so on and so forth. Have you already had a chance to look at the homework assignment? Okay, does it look? Do you have any questions on it? Yeah?
Does the list view just auto-populate and give funny stuff?
The list view will auto-populate once you say, once you define its code and you say, notify dataset changed. The only thing you have to do is that the list elements look a little bit different. Instead of being a piece of text and a button to the side, now I ask you to put two pieces of text, one on top of the other. And if you want to be fancy, you could have the title written in a bigger font. It's not that hard. And then you could also put a thin line at the bottom so that, there is some separation between the various list view elements. So you can have some other visual cue. Otherwise, you just get a bunch of strings, and you don't know necessarily, how they are associated together. That there is a title with a subtitle that belongs to the title above. So if you use a little bit of visual cue, I think it would be best. So, but per se, I gave you sample code that does most of what you need to do, and the only thing is to making it work all together. Any question up to this point in class in general? Okay. So what I want to do now is to start another way of building applications. So what we will be using is Apache Cordova, which is an environment that enables you to write essentially web code for a mix of HTML and JavaScript, and then have these run on multiple platforms. And the supported platforms are several. They include at least Android phones, iOS phones, Mac, Windows PCs, and Windows phones and something else as well, I guess. So the idea is this. You have seen in the previous class that it's possible to create Java libraries in Android and make them communicate with the JavaScript running into a web view, right? So the communication is bidirectional. The JavaScript can call Java libraries that you define, and the Java libraries can cause JavaScript to run in the browser, okay? So building on these, there are similar methods that have been built for iOS. There is the equivalent of the web view also in iOS, even though the communication mechanisms are slightly different. So some people had the idea of as follows. Well, we may already have web apps that behave nicely, and we love JavaScript, and we don't want to necessarily write multiple copies of the same application. So why don't we write our app entirely as a web app, and then in order to access some of the features of the phone, such as taking a photo, taking a movie, getting the location, we call a Java library that gives us back the result when we need it. Okay, and so this is how Apache Cordova started some time ago. It was called Phone Gap because it would essentially close the gap between a phone and the web. Then it was an independent project. It then became part of the Apache Foundation, and because of some reason having to do, it's funny how software works. But essentially, PhoneGap had open source code, but it had the trademark on the name PhoneGap. And so when this became part of the Apache Foundation, the trademark didn't follow. I don't know the details of the story, but this was renamed into the Cordova project, which confuses me to no end because Cordova is a city in Spain, but the city in Spain is called Cordoba with B. You know that B and V are similar in Spanish. At least to the best of my recollection, Cordova is written with B in Spanish. Maybe somebody can check on Google Maps. But so instead, the Cordova project is written with V, which is, by the way, the Italian spelling of the Spanish city. But I have no idea where it came from, okay? So you need to install Cordova on your laptops in order to do development. And I will provide detailed instructions. Essentially, some of the instructions are available already. I mean, what I did is I just followed, the standard instructions, Apache Cordova, and you go here, okay, and get started, the documentation, plugins, So if you get started, I think that there is a way to install Cordova, okay? The only problem is that it's one of these, computer rat holes in which you get stuck. That is, it's very easy. You just do npm install -g Cordova, yeah, right? But then you have to install npm first. npm is the Node package manager, okay? So Cordova depends on Node.js, which is a serving framework written in JavaScript, okay? You don't need to understand it. but you just need to have it installed on your computer in order to develop with Cordova, okay? So, and in order to install Node.js, I'm sure that you have to install some other thing, and so you would spend a couple of hours cursing while you install everything you need. No, maybe not, it only took me, it took me less than 1 hour to get it up and running. What you do in Cordova is this. So you install Cordova, and then you create an app. And when you create an app, it just creates a directory, okay? And I want to show you how the directory system looks like. Oh my goodness, this is always small, and I cannot change that font, I guess. Well, maybe, yeah, I don't know. Maybe I can show you with the Finder. So I built this, but this does not help. How do I magnify the font of the Finder? Oh, okay, too difficult. This is really annoying. Does anybody know the shortcut for, poor-sighted people to increase the font size of the screen? Like if I click 5 times and then I jump up and down, no. Yeah, no, it doesn't. No, but there is these things for assistive technologies. I should really enable them. 1 second. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Use keyboard shortcuts to zoom. Toggle zoom, meta, yada 8. Let's try to see whether it works. Yep. Okay, great. I should have discovered this long ago. Okay, so... okay, but now I zoom in a place that I don't want. Okay, let's try again. Kind of. Okay, so the structure of an app is essentially the following. There is a resource folder where you can put images that you think you may need, or other static resources. Okay, for example, I put some app logos and I put some other stuff here. Okay? Then there is a www folder that is the material that will be served by your application. So what happens is this. You write source code. By source code, I mean you write your application prototype in the www folder. Okay? And then you can decide which target platforms to install. For example, I installed here just the browser target platform, which will enable me to debug on my browser the code, which is very convenient. And I also installed the Android target platform. Okay, but what you do is that you write code in the www folder, and then you say to Cordova to please run it for that particular platform, or produce an APK or whatever is called in that particular platform, but essentially produce the package for that particular platform, okay? So the idea in Cordova is that you write your code once, and then you can get it to run on multiple devices, okay? So the www folder, for those of you who have taken a web class, is sort of familiar. It contains some index.html, which is just an HTML file which is displayed, and then it contains various stuff that we will go through. So there is a, or I don't know if it was already here or if I made it, but I made a directory. I think this is entirely mine. So you can create a directories inside the www folder, right? And you can put what you want. In my starter app, I created some JavaScript directory where I put my JavaScript code, some image directory where I can put some other images that I like. I give you Font Awesome, which is a set of icons that facilitates building applications. I just downloaded it from the web. If you Google for Font Awesome, it's a nice set of icons, and it's just some zip that you expand in a folder. And then I have a directory for my CSS, which is the styling for the web. How many of you have not seen HTML or web development. And I don't mean writing an HTML file once, but I mean with JavaScript and CSS. Raise your hand if you haven't seen it. I just want to get a quick gauge. Okay, so half of you, yeah, that's what I would imagine. I will try to cover everything, okay? And please ask questions if you get lost in any way, right? So this is a general structure, and then you can see that there is this platforms directory in which when you create a platform, files get put into there. Okay, so for example, there is this Android directory and browser directory. The trick when you develop with Cordova is, unless you super need it and you really know what you're doing and you're really crazy, you don't touch too much of the platform directories. Because every time you build for a specific platform, Cordova will essentially overwrite whatever you might have modified in that directory, okay? So you develop in the top directory, and then Cordova automatically generates the rest of the code, okay? So let's see how it works, and then so there is an all-important configuration file. Wait, no, this is another file. I'm sorry, I was confused. Sorry, I'm looking for a file, but I cannot find it. Must have ended up here. No. Yeah, but I had okay. Okay, so, and you have a list of plugins as well, just to give you the structure of the application. That is, if you don't do anything else than just writing for the web, you don't need any special plugin. You just write a JavaScript and HTML code that will run in your web view, and that's it. But normally, when you have a phone, you really want to exploit at least some of the capabilities of the phone. And so in this case, you need some special thingy that makes that gives you this capability. For example, we will see how to get the location, how to take photos, how to do this and that. Once upon a time, Cordova, when it was called PhoneGap, had a sort of monolithic architecture. You would get PhoneGap together with a huge sort of maxi library that contained everything possible. And there were several problems with it. One was that, it was difficult for people to contribute new functionality. And another problem was that it would require you to, whenever you created an app, to give the app all possible permissions, just in case you decided to call one particular function that needed that permission. So this was not very functional as a model. So what they did when they moved to Cordova was to move to a plugin architecture. So every time you need some functionality, there will be a plugin that you need to install, and you have to essentially manage your list of plugins. And the plugins are platform dependent. So for example, if you install the camera plugin, it will be some set of Java for Android and some set of whatever it is, Swift code for iOS. But you generally don't need to worry about that, okay? Every plugin has a documentation and has a way to call it, and so we will see various examples. In my starter app, perhaps because I forgot to clean up, I'm giving you various plugins. One done by the UC president, no, I'm joking, is another one. This plugin Napoletano is used to read the starter intent. So I prepared this application yesterday. What I'm doing is this. I published probably the paper with the nicest title I've ever published last week. It's called "Some Like It Hoax: Detecting Fake News in Social Networks." This was done with several co-authors, okay? But the title is really nice because we detect fake news because people like it hoax. I mean, because people like hoaxes. We essentially look at Facebook, and based on who likes what, we can detect fake news with accuracies above 99%, with very small data sets. And so we are building some apps in my group that will give you access to these fake news classifiers and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm collaborating with various people and starting a project that is a lot of fun. And so unfortunately, this app here, I essentially produced it by taking my code that I was developing for this fake news detection app, essentially, and slashing out a lot of pieces that are not needed. But I forgot to slash out all the various plugins. So you see, the plugin Com Napoletano Cordova plugin intent is a plugin that enables you to listen to the original intent that launches the app. In my case, for the fake news app, I wanted to have it because I wanted to enable you to, say, read a piece of news on your browser, okay? And then you could share the link on Android. You know that when you share the link, there is a list of apps that say, hey, I can share a link, no? And, by the way, this is something that I should show you. Can you remind me, Rakshit? But there is documentation that contains the code for doing the sharing on the Android site. I should have really done it, though. But essentially, whenever an app creates an intention to share, it creates an intent that contains the URL and it's of a certain type. So I want essentially to capture that intent inside this application. And this Napoletano Cordova plugin intent is one that enables you to access the starter intent of the app. It's an example of something that is easy to do in Android, capturing the intent that started you. You basically say, get intent. I put some of the documentation in homework 4, actually, because here in the second activity, in my suggested method, you have to capture the intent that started the second activity to detect the news site that you have to open, okay? So in Android, it's very easy to get the intent that opened a specific application. Here we have to use a plugin. I'm using also a plugin that is called Cordova Custom Configuration, okay? I do that because, and in fact, I think I need to do a little bit more cleanup in my manifest site. But I do it because I want to inject special stuff in my manifest file only for Android, okay? It's again part of this fake news app. I promise I clean up, but I didn't realize until now that I had this piece of code still in. Then I have a Cordova plugin device, which is a plugin that tells me the device type. So I wanted to write slightly different code depending on whether I'm on Android or on browser. And this is very common to do and very important to do because, not on every platform you have all capabilities. And so you may want to know on which device you are in order to take various branches in the code if you need to, right? So the device plugin gives you a way of doing that. I have a whitelist plugin that I entirely forgot why I needed it, but there must have been a good reason. And then I have some other configuration, okay? And so the way you start using these things is, this is a global magnification. Well, let me give you an example. So if you do Cordova platform list, you get the list of platforms I have installed. I have installed Android and browser. It tells you also which other platforms are available to install, okay, and you install them. And I think you can then do Cordova plugin list. Okay, this lists the plugins, and then if you look at the documentation, you can add the plugins that you wish to use. So essentially, there are these sort of two ingredients that are a bit a la carte: plugins and platforms. Okay, and we will deal more with them. But at the beginning, what we are going to do is that we are basically you can basically use my starter app, which you can find in Git in Bitbucket. It's here. It's Cordova Starter App, okay? Written all together. If you want to download it, you can probably. But you would need to install Apache Cordova to really run it. Okay? Okay, what is my advice? That text? Oh, no, nothing. Oh, this is also something that I should probably remove. Okay, yeah, this is advice for another thing. And then when you run the app, you run it as follows: Cordova run browser. This will bring up another copy of your browser. I don't know if you know it, but this is a very useful trick. So if you have Chrome, Cordova will bring up another Chrome instance. It's not advertised on a Mac. It's easier to do on Linux. But essentially on a Mac you can fire up different Chromes that have different profiles. You know that Chrome has a profile. It logs you in as what you usually are. It contains your bookmarks. It contains your whatever else, right? Cordova, when it starts with a fresh copy of Chrome that is a different one. And if you want, you can, on a Mac, search and figure out how to launch multiple Chrome browsers. For Firefox, it's even a little bit simpler. What I have installed on my laptop, and it's very convenient, is an application somebody wrote that is called Multi-Firefox. If you fire it up, it asks you which of the many Firefox profiles I want to use, and I can pick and choose. And you can see that I have several of them. Okay, I have a default and a bunch of others. What is the purpose of having all these the profiles? That you can configure them slightly differently, and above all, that you can run multiple ones without interfering. Let me explain. This is more useful in web development, but it's useful also here. Suppose I want to pretend that I'm two different users that are logged into a website. I cannot do it with a single browser, because a browser will have its own cookies, and if I log in as Luca, I cannot be logged in as Anna, say. No? But suppose I really want to test some piece of code with two different browsers. Then I can launch two different profiles of Chrome or of Firefox, okay? So when I say Cordova Run Browser, this will not launch my standard Android, but it will, my standard Chrome, but it will launch its own version of it. And if everything works, yes, it does, it simply says, hello class, and it displays this sort of minimal app, okay? If you are in Chrome, you can view developer tools. And once you are in the developer tools, you can pretend that you are on mobile, and you can even, I guess, use, say that you have a Nexus 5, and this is how your app would look like on a Nexus 5X, which is kind of handy for debugging, right? And so this gives you a preview, essentially, of how the screen would look like. You see, you can scroll here. It's a web page. Okay, so this is how the... and it's much easier to develop in the browser, and then when your app is ready, you actually deploy it to the phone, and you hope everything works. Because the debugging is easier, okay? It's easier to debug in a browser, because you see here, I have access to, I can say, for example, inspect, and it shows me which element it is. I'm sorry that the font is small. I wonder if I can magnify it. Yeah. Sorry. 1 second, okay? You see, I can inspect the element, and this tells me that it's an H1 which says hello class, okay? Yes?
It doesn't work like an emulator, it's just showing you a little work.
I can also run it in the emulator. Very good question. I simply do this. It's just that debugging will become a little bit harder. So I can say Cordova run Android, and this will essentially run it on some available Android device. So if I plug in my phone, it will run it on my phone. And if I do this, it will run it on an emulator. And if you have multiple devices attached, there is a way to say which target you want, okay? So let me see what happens if I do this. It starts the new Android build, which may take a moment. Ta-da-da, ta-ta-ta. Okay, the build was successful. It has built the APK, but then it tells me that there is no device found. So I don't know if it's auto-deploying, auto-launching an emulator. It's not, so I should somehow launch an Android emulator, which I guess I can do. The easiest way would be to do it from Android Studio. So let me just do it a second. But I can just open one at random. But then I can... yeah, it's still building some stuff. Okay, I can take the Nexus 5 and run it. This will run the emulator. Come on. Okay. Okay, and so if I do this, once this boots, now I should be able to run it if I do give it the command again. Let's see whether this works. It should be able to auto-detect that there is an emulator running. Build successful, install successful, yeah. Okay, yes, it works. Okay, so you can also do it that way. Okay, and if you do it this way, then you can also look at, connect to the emulator via Android Studio. And so I think that Android Studio, actually I haven't tried it so far with these new settings. But if I go in Android Studio here, I should be able to look at the Android monitor, and I should be able to see the logs. You see, these are the logs of the emulator, all of them. I would need to filter them in some meaningful way. But so if you use some logging API in your application, then you would see the logs appear there. It's just a little bit more involved than developing in the browser. So my advice to you is to essentially get your code right when you play with it in the browser, and then later on debug it. But you can debug it, okay? You can just run it in an emulator that does everything you need. So let me close a little few of these things. Okay, so we go back. Now, what I need to do is explain you the structure of this Android app. And unfortunately, even bringing up the Android app from scratch it requires quite a bit of JavaScript. I mean, not complicated JavaScript, but it requires some JavaScript, okay? And the other problem is this, that because I develop often in JavaScript, and I teach also, the web class, I have developed in time some strong preferences on how to build the app. And so I want to show you quickly what I wrote, but then I need to do essentially a deep dive into JavaScript and into how to build an app in JavaScript that will take us a little bit of time, some classes essentially, okay? So even to build this very simple Hello World app, there is some interesting stuff in the background. And so that's why I gave you the starter code, because it's written with some attention to some important details, and I want to cover them. So let me show you quickly what is in there, okay? So there is an index.html file. I show you without explaining, and then I started a deep dive. So the index.html5 has two portions. So there is a head and a body. This is true for most HTML files, right? In the head, you load various resources, and here I'm loading essentially a bunch of JavaScript and a bunch of style files. So let me do a quick rundown of what I load and why, and then we will go into more details. But I load, some of the things I load are sort of boilerplate that I copied from the, Cordova Starter App official. Then I load some special things. One is myapp.css. This is the special CSS. CSS is the styling that you use in order to decide how things appear. And I will cover later how I created this styling, okay? But I created the styling, I load the styling that is particular to my app. I call it myapp.css just because why not? It's a simple name. So that will contain, for example, the instructions for, the titles have to be green and the text has to be in this font and the things have to look a certain way, okay? Then I load stupid.css. If you work in CSS, there are many CSS frameworks that help you lay things down on the screen. Okay, one of the common ones is called Bootstrap, and it was created by Twitter. The problem with these frameworks is that they are overcomplicated often, and it's very hard to customize them in a simple way. So one day, my friend and colleague Massimo Di Piero, who is the creator of Web2Py, the tool I use in my web class, was thoroughly fed up and said, I can do better than these guys. And he wrote a framework in CSS that he called stupid.css because it's good even for stupid people like him or like me. I know he's smart, but I'm stupid in CSS. I was never able to really use happily any other framework because they're all bloated and super complicated. But stupid.css is very, very simple to use. Massimo is a great person for creating very simple instructions. So if you go, actually let me go with, I can also go here. Stupid.css, all the documentation you ever need to know is here in front of your nose. You can create buttons by creating something and saying .btn.green, and that's a green button. It's very simple. More simple than that, if you need to divide the screen, it's easy to divide it in half, in thirds, in fourths. It's easy to decide whether things have to shrink or not. So you can look at the documentation of stupid.css, but basically you're done here. There is nothing more to it, okay? So you can easily, and that's all you need mostly for a CSS framework, right? You just need to be able to lay things down on the screen in a regular way, and having some nice shape of buttons and some icons, and all the rest, is sort of, you deal with it when you need it, but it's not something you need immediately. So I use a stupid.css, which is also very lightweight, and I recommend it. It's a good way to maintain one's sanity while developing. I use Font Awesome. Font Awesome is another one of these things. Font Awesome icons, you see that it auto-completes because so many people use them. And so you go here, and you find an ad. What is it? And you find all possible icons that you can use. Okay? You may not be struck by it, but developing icons is a pain if you had to do it from scratch. It's not so easy to develop good, nice, graphically looking icons. And so having a large library of icons is a big facilitator for building apps. Okay? And I will show you how to use these icons, but you see there is a huge list of them. And if you look at examples, okay, so the other thing that is useful is examples. It teaches you how to change them in size. It teaches you how to make them spin. Very useful to have, some spin bar that says, I'm still loading and these kind of things. And all of these can be done extremely simply. You see, this is all the HTML code you need in order to say loading preceded by one of these spinner icons. So it's very pleasant. Okay? So going back here, I load my CSS, I load stupid.css, and I load font awesome. Okay, this gives me some styling that is available to me when I create the app. At this point, I load some other JavaScript libraries, and for now I give you the list. But I know that these you don't need why you need them all, but I will cover them in great detail or in some detail later. Okay, so I'm loading essentially jQuery. jQuery is a library that in brief has the following purpose. I told you that when you parse HTML, what you get is a big tree that is the DOM tree, the Document Object Model tree. No? This is the tree that represents the content of the page. For example, in the case of this, I mean, you can actually visualize it. There is no mystery to it. You see, this is a DOM tree. There is an HTML node that contains a head and a body node, and the body node internally contains a div node that contains an H1 node that is a title, and it contains a P node that is a paragraph, and so you can explore your DOM tree. Okay, so this is a DOM, the Domain Object Model tree. And the point is that in JavaScript, it's a little bit awkward to play with the DOM tree directly because of a couple of reasons. First of all, JavaScript, was written a long time ago, and some of these methods are, somewhat arcane. And the other reason is that the DOM tree, unfortunately, differs in some details among browsers. Now a bit less so because I think, didn't Internet Explorer go out of fashion? But there are differences in the DOM tree, okay? And the jQuery essentially gives you a simple language to manipulate the DOM tree from JavaScript. You can do things such as, inserting a string, removing a string. I don't think we will be using it a lot in this class. We will be using it in an extremely limited way, jQuery. I still load it because of habit, because if jQuery is not there, I feel unsettled. It's as if you, I don't know how to say, it's as if you removed the wall of my house. It looks the same inside, but I cannot do it doesn't work as usual. So I'm so used to having jQuery available that if I ever need to do anything with it and it's not there, I get in panic mode. Okay, so I have jQuery available. I have Vue.js, which I will go into details later. Vue essentially is the piece of JavaScript that will enable us to have dynamic pages that change. This is a very vague description, but Vue.js is, you saw in the last class the list view, right? We essentially have a list that is in a Java data structure, and then we have to lay it out on the screen. What will do the same favor to us once we are in web, right? What is the thing that if we have a list, will take care of laying it out nicely on the screen, taking into account that the list can be variable length and all that, right? Well, that thing there is Vue.js, which I chose because of simplicity. It works really well, it's very nice to use, and I will go into details into how to use it, okay? The other ingredient is randomstring.js. You don't actually need it always. I always end up using it because I always need some random strings here and there. I was using it in the fake news app because I wanted that to create a random token identifying the user whenever the user installed the app, okay? And this may be useful to you as well if you do applications, right? If you do a, say, battleship game, you still want to have the two users to have two different identities. You can use this library that I picked out from somewhere. I think there is a details in it in order to generate cryptographically safe random strings. And then there is a piece that is all important that says index.js. This is the JavaScript I write. These are my instructions. The others are libraries by other people. Index.js is my code. Okay, so my code essentially is composed. The rest is libraries, but what is the thing that I have to write? I have to write the styling in my app.css above, right? Then I have to write my JavaScript into index.js, and then I have to write my HTML here in index.html itself. Okay? So the way you develop for Cordova is that you write these three pieces: the CSS to give the styling, the JavaScript to give the dynamics, and the HTML, to build the skeleton, I think, of the page. Okay, these are the three things you actually write. Okay, and at the end of this Cordova.js, which is a JavaScript that comes with a framework. Okay, that you load. So those are the main ingredients. One difference compared to developing for the web is this: that when you develop in Cordova, you don't develop a website that has links. There are no links. You have to build what is called a single-page app, which has the benefit that this is what is currently fashionable among developers, right? Everybody wants to build a single-page app because, so the UI is really smooth. But, well, here you have to do it. So no links. You will have to take care of. You will have to take care of switching the content in front of the nose of the user yourself, and I will teach you how to do it, and it's quite easy actually. Okay, so I'll teach you in some examples. But so this is what it is, and since a lot of you have never seen neither HTML nor JavaScript, I will give you some introduction to it, and then so the order in which I need to do things is this: an introduction to HTML and JavaScript. Then I will show you how to build some simple HTML and how to bootstrap the JavaScript to show the initial page. So there is a little bit of work that we have to do to get into this. So the curse for you is that, it takes some work to get into it. The advantage to you is that you really learn stuff that is useful, meaning that you can apply most of what you learn even if you just want to develop for the web. I mean, this is sort of the thing that every self-respecting computer scientist that wants to be able to write code should anyway know. Okay, so you're not sort of wasting your time. Okay, so let's start from the easy part, HTML. HTML is a markup language. I mean, how many of you don't know HTML? Because perhaps you think I'm crazy to explain it. Raise your hand if you don't know. It's okay if you don't know. Okay, there are a few people. Okay, good, fine. So, a web page, most web pages you will have some starter text, but they have these things that are called tags. There are two types of tags. There is a tag that is written this way, can contain some stuff inside, and is closed in this way. And then there are tags that don't have an opening and closing variant, and that open and close this way. These are the two syntaxes for an HTML tag. An HTML tag can have attributes. For example, you can say that this tag can have a class, and they are written as name of the tag equals sign string of the tag, string. Okay, so this is just a general syntax of HTML. Okay, so what are the useful tags? Well, there are HTML. Head is the header of the page that doesn't get displayed, and then there is body. Body is, the body of the JavaScript, of the HTML, where the page is laid out. Those will be given to you. But what are the other interesting tags? Well, there are some very simple ones that I explain basically for tradition. So the H1 title was done to have a title. The H2 tag is a smaller title. Okay, and you can go down to H3, H4, H5. I don't know what the limit is. Okay. Then you have, for example, a P, and this is a paragraph. Or you can say, for example, UL, and you can say list element, bullet 1, close the list element, and then you can, this is a bullet list of 3 bullets, okay, and then you close the list, and so this is a way to generate a list with bullets, okay. These are sort of the simple tags, and yeah, I should have put them in some place where I can actually open these. Let me try to see if I can. How to be lazy? I don't know what's the quickest way to be lazy. Yeah, but it's sort of annoying, right? Yes. I mean, aside of the fact of where do I save it, right? I mean, and then there is, yeah, okay, I can open in downloads. I can open foo.html. Okay, maybe this works. Where did it go? I opened it where? Oh, okay. So, and you see that I managed to do a syntax error even though my text was very small, right? Why did I do that? Because I did that the wrong way around, okay? So I save it. And so you see one peculiarity of HTML, by the way, that even if you do things wrong, the browsers never give you syntax errors, right? Essentially, people used to write at the beginning, when HTML was written by hand, all kind of erroneous code, okay? And so browsers evolved in order to try to carry on without complaining, which leads to various problems. For example, the same HTML, if it contains errors, it may render differently for different browsers. But to you, the problem is essentially the following, that when stuff doesn't work in HTML, you don't get an error. You will simply not see stuff, okay? And so this is a bit perplexing, but this will be what happens to you all the time. You do something that should work, you see exactly nothing, and it's not that everything disappeared, it's that there is an error, but it's not telling you. And so you have to figure out where the error is, okay? I don't know what happens if we do these, yeah, I don't know how to insert an interesting error in this, but for example, if you forget to close one of these elements, nothing would change. Chrome is kind enough to believe, to say, because a lot of people didn't used to close list items, and so Chrome just thinks, oh, he's starting a new list item, evidently he must have meant closing the previous one. They have all these sort of rules in order to make up for the laziness of users, okay? So, these are the interesting, these are sort of the standard tags, but then there are two that are sort of more important and sort of universal. That is, when I went into the Android layout, I explained that everything can be basically thought of as a series of rectangles that are one inside the other, right? And that you can lay out in specific ways. Similarly is HTML layout. So there is one element that is the generic rectangle and that you can make it behave any way you want. And this element is called div. Okay? A div element simply denotes a rectangular region of screen. Actually, rather than doing it here, let me do something else so that it's both a little bit better and you have the documentation. So git checkout branch HTML examples. So I create a new branch of my starter app for doing HTML examples, and in this way I can code with some way of loading stupid.css and the other style files on which it's more amusing to build. So let's imagine that I want to do two-column text. How do I do text that is laid out into two columns, okay? So what I have to do is essentially create a big rectangle that will contain the two columns, and inside it build two rectangles, one for each column of text, okay? So even by just saying that, I will put it, let's put it below the hello world, okay? I know that here what I have to do is build a div, and inside of this div, build the two smaller divs for the two columns. You see that this editor is helping me. I'm using PyCharm that is actually optimized for Python, but does a reasonable job for HTML as well. But you can use any editor, obviously. Okay? So this is my general structure. And then I say, how do I build the columns? Well, let's go look at stupid.css once more. So you go to stupid.css. You go read the instructions. And here, below, it says grid. There is a simple grid system that is based on these classes: container, quarter, third, half. So classes have this purpose. When you a class is an attribute that you can attach to an HTML element to influence the way it is rendered. This sounds very complicated, but let me give you an example first and it will become clearer, okay? So I am here and I say, you see, I have like the class container and then I need two halves that are half compressible. So how do I do this? Well, I say this. The main thing will have a class that is equal to container. And these two things here, class is equal to half compressible. And this also, okay? By the way, note that Massimo is using the dot notation to define the class here, but there is no dot when you put it here. Okay? This is just because in the CSS file, you use a dot to denote a class, but not in the HTML itself. For the moment, just trust it that it works this way, okay? And so here, we can insert the text for the two columns, and we can say, so who studies the Divine Comedy by Dante? That's how it starts. And then who gives me the beginning of some classic in another language? Eh? Yeah, but that's fake Latin. Okay. The best of times is the worst of times. It's close enough. What book is it, I'm afraid?
It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. First sentence in the Tale of Two Cities.
It was the best of times. It was the worst.
Oh. And this is the first sentence in?
The Tale of Two Cities.
Okay. With a comma? Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's see how this renders. So the one annoyance with Cordova is that each time you want to test it, you need to launch it, right? So it's not enough to reload the web page in the browser, okay? Because when you launch Cordova, what Cordova is doing, when you say Cordova run browser, Cordova is essentially taking your new www code and is packaging it to be run in the browser. So if you change your www code and you just reload in the browser, you will see no effect, right? Because the launch is done of two steps. One is that Cordova is building your app, which in this case just basically means copying a bunch of files, and then launching the browser served from the copies of the files. So, you know, don't be surprised if you cannot simply hit reload. It's a little bit annoying, you know, it does slow down development a little bit. And you see that it works, right? Because I generated two columns. Now this looks a bit silly, but you see these are really two columns, right? And because they are squishable, because they are compressible, they compress right. If you don't say that they're compressible, then they have a minimum size of 200 pixels. You can read the documentation in stupid.css. But so this tells you, it's a nice name, eh? But this tells you essentially rectangles corresponds to divs, okay? And when you build a page, you really have to think the architecture of the page. You know, what goes on top, what sections the page has. If you have various horizontal sections in a page, every one of those sections will be a div, right? So div are extreme, the basic building brick, if you will, of web pages, right? And the point of divs is this, that by giving classes to divs, such as this compressible class, and by writing the appropriate CSS, you can make them behave in the way you want. Okay? You can define them of background colors, for example. Stupid.css contains helpers for colors. Okay? So, for example, if we want to build... where are the colors? Hey. I think there are colors. Yeah. There is a dot red, right? Very surprising. Dot red makes the text look with a red background. So we can make, for example, this belong to a red class. And so if I reload these, nothing happens, as I told you. But if I rebuild the app and relaunch, I need to stop the server and launch it again. And this has become with a red background, okay? So essentially these divs, I mean, there is like a very complex art of, making the things look exactly the way you want. And I'm giving you a bit of the bones infrastructure. It was a decision in this class that I want to give you at least the basics of it so that you can expand on it on your own if you like, okay? So I cannot cover all the CSS possible ways of styling stuff, but at least you know that they exist and you should be able to search for things that are helpful to you if you need, okay? So, as I say, one of the building blocks is a div. The other the other universal building block is a span. So, just as a div is a portion of the space, so a rectangle, a span is a portion of text. The difference is that a span is not a rectangular in shape in general. If you do a span around a single word, it may be rectangular. But a span can also involve, line breaks, and so it can have a funny shape. It's as if, when you study and you are highlight in yellow some sections of a book, okay, that's the equivalent, the visual equivalent of a span. So, for example, here I can say, mezzo del cammin, and I want to highlight it in yellow. So I put it into a span, and then I can give it a class. I hope that there is yellow in stupid.css. Well, there is surely blue, okay? And so these, if I did it right, should cause that portion of the sentence to become blue. Let me see. Okay. Okay, so this works as well. What other elements are important? Well, most of you will want to have some button. What do we write on the button? Okay. Let's see how it looks like. Okay, so this is a button. If you press it, it clicks, but it doesn't do anything because we have not defined how it looks. And if you go to the documentation, you can see that you can change the aspect. You can make it rounded. I mean, stupid.css helps you make it look various ways. You can make it rounded. You can change the color, and so you have simple ways of adding color. Adding things. Another thing that is useful to us is I told you that there is this very nice library for icons. Okay, how do you use it? Well, per se, sorry, I have the caps lock on. Per se, the I tag means italics. Okay, so per se, what you put into these would simply be italics, like you can say stop. And if you do these, this will display italicized. Slanted, right? You see, it's slanted. But FontAwesome.css, what it does is the following. FontAwesome redefines the aspect of italicize the text so that it will look different. Not only different, but it will actually have a background that will actually display the icon. So in practice, the way to use font awesome is that you create an empty I tag, and you give it a class that is equal to fa dash, and then I don't know. Why I don't know? Because there's too many icons. So I need to go to the icons. Font awesome icons. I go to the icons. We can choose an icon that looks like a stop sign. Maybe there is one that is called stop. There are several, in fact. I don't know which one you like the best. Okay. I really would have wanted the sort of, street sign. But we can use this one, stop circle. Is it okay? Let's try it as an example. Okay. Stop circle. And if you do this, and you relaunch, because now you know that your life will be relaunching, okay, you get the icon there. And you can change the spacing, and you can play with these kind of things. Generally, you leave it empty when you use font awesome. I don't know what happens if you put stuff inside. I mean, you can try, but I don't. It's not the purpose. So it's yeah. I mean, sometimes you can put an icon into another. It's not really an icon, but you have these modifiers, such as make it. You can stack icons on top of the other. Okay, and in that case, you create an I tag that contains two I tags for the icons you are stacking. You can look in the examples, and it teaches you how to do that. That I've done. I don't know what. I mean, we could try, but I don't know what happens there. Okay, so in this super minimal introduction that I'm going to give you, this is what I really wanted to tell you of HTML. Okay, what time is it? Okay, we still have a tiny bit of time. Are there questions up to now? So this is a very quick introduction, but basically once you know how to put text, once you know how to build rectangles, and once you know how to build spans and add icons, well, you can get a lot done actually. Okay, the one thing that I haven't taught you is how to add styling to these elements if you want to create your own styles. Okay, and how to refer to particular elements. So let me start from how to refer to particular elements. This will be not useful immediately, but it will be useful when we will develop JavaScript. So when we develop JavaScript, we will sometimes want to say, I want to do something to a particular element. So how do you refer from code to elements? One way is that you can assign IDs to elements. This div here, I assign it an ID of VuDiv. I will tell you later why, but this will enable me to refer to it from JavaScript. So essentially, two common attributes that you have are ID and class. ID is used to identify unique elements, and you should have only one thing that has a particular ID in your code. Class is used to associate elements of HTML, tags of HTML, with the styling for rendering them. Okay? So, how do I define how things look? For example, I might believe that there is not enough space between the icon and the please stop, okay? And also there is not enough space on top of the button, okay? So how do I, for instance, add those kind of spaces? There are two ways. By now that everything has two ways of doing it or more. There is the simple way and there is the smart way. I show you the simple way first, even though I really do not recommend it, but it seems to be what most people are doing. And so I will show it to you. It's certainly more elementary. You can edit my app.css, okay, and you can write something like this. Okay, let me do it properly at least. Sorry, I'm flipping around. I have too many files open and I get lost. One second. Let me close. See, suppose I wanted to add space around this button. I may not want to add space around all buttons. I just want to add space for that button. So the proper way to do it is involves doing a couple of things. First, you want to attach to this button something that enables you to change this style and not every other style. Okay, so essentially we have to invent a new class for this button. I will call it stop button as class. Okay, why not? So this is stop button. You don't need to declare classes like in a programming language. You just come up with them and you give them. But I found, but it is very useful when you develop to think at which classes, to think at what elements should be rendered similar and give specific classes to them. Don't just say, oh, this is a button, let me change all buttons, right? Because things have a specific space and place and role in a web page, and you want each one of those to be, independently modifiable. So, great. Now that this thing has a class, I can refer to it from my styling, and I can write, I need to go into my app.css, and I can say, well, things that are of style stop button have to be rendered in this way. And here you have a number of attributes. How do you figure them out, by the way? Well, one way to figure them out is the following. Sorry, this is the old copy, right? I want to be here. I can do this. I can inspect the button. Now I see, okay, the button there, and here is the element. And you see that here I have the styles at the bottom. This tells me all the styles that have been applied to this element to make it look the way it looks. Okay, so to this button, why does it look green and why does it look etc., etc.? Well, because in this style file, somebody said that a button has a background color of green, has a color of white for the text, has a padding of this and this, and has a margin of that and that. Okay? So if you want to figure out why something looks a certain way, you open in, Firefox has the equivalent thing, but you go into Chrome, you inspect the element, and you look at the styling tab, and that tells you why everything has a certain looks a certain way. This is a bit complex because there can be many rules that apply to the same element, right? For a button, we have essentially 3 layers of rules, and it tells you where this comes from. But essentially, some of the rules will come from the user agent style sheet. This means essentially the default of the browser, okay? Some other of the rules will come from this thing here, which is stupid.css, essentially. So here we can try how various things look like. For example, I can say margin top, and I can give some amount of margin at the top. For example, I can give it 10 pixels. Okay? If I do this, I see that it doesn't work. Why? Wait. I think I'm on the wrong element, right? I wanted to do it on the button. I simply was in the wrong place. Margin top 10 pixels. Okay. You want more space? 20 pixels. Great. What else do we want of this button? I don't know. Okay, so this may be fine. Suppose we want to add this margin top 20 pixels. So this is defined just temporarily in the browser. It's a good way for me to play with it, right? But once I decide that 20 pixels is the right amount, I can copy these. I hope I can, at least. Yeah, maybe I can. Okay, I can go in the definition of my stop button class, and I can paste that. Okay, if I do this, this will tell, you see the dot means everything of class stop button. I could say also div, every div of class stop button, but actually it's not a div, it's a button. I can do this. So the general syntax is tag name dot class name, okay? But you can omit the tag name if you don't care. Okay, so if I do this and I rerun my app, you see now there is a space. And so you can go on doing this. For instance, we want all text in this div, all text in the 2 paragraphs to be always italic. Okay, let's try to do that as another example. How do I do it? Well, I go again to my index.html. You see, this container contains the 2 columns, right? But you can have more than one class associated with each div. So here I also will have what is a good class that I can use? My text columns. A bit of a silly name, but that's the class name I use, okay? So now I want to specify how things are laid out in these when they belong to this style. So I go to my app.css and I say my text columns, and I can say font family, the font style italic. Okay, and this should work. Let's see whether it really does. Oops, sorry. Yes, it does. Now it's italicized. Okay? Then I can complain, for example, that my text columns also, they go right to the border, right? They should have some padding around them. And so I can go back here and say, and I also want padding left 10 pixels and padding right 10 pixels, whatever. And so if I rerun, luckily it's fast to rerun, you see now that there is a little bit of padding. So you can essentially do this. So the process is this. First of all, you lay out the logical structure of the page in rectangles, and you take care to associate classes with your elements that make sense according to their role in the page. And then once that is done, you spend some time in the CSS to change the style so that everything is spaced right, colored right, has the right font, and has the right relationship to each other. And it's a little bit time consuming at first, but it's not too bad altogether. Okay, I mean it's no worse than playing with the XML layout in Android, I guess. Okay. I also have to tell you that, in my opinion, this is absolutely the barbaric way of doing CSS. Everybody, 80% of people perhaps do this, and I thoroughly hate it. The reason is as follows, that CSS done in this way is worse than the basic programming language I was using, 40 years ago and counting. It does not even have the concept of a variable. Let me explain what I mean. Suppose you define a beautiful color, a beautiful shade of blue, and you want to use it for buttons, but also for other elements in the page. There is no way to associate the shade of color to a variable, and then use a variable all over the place. You have to sprinkle the definition of the color all around your code, which is horrible, right? Because if you decide that your blue should be a slightly different shade of blue, then you have to essentially search and replace all the various strings in your code. I mean, it's really as if everything you have ever learned about coding, that is, you should not repeat things twice, but you should use variables, loops, scoping, etc. They threw it all away to the wind when they designed the CSS. This is a common in many of the things they did for the web. The web was not born as a very powerful mechanism. Originally, it was born in order to share simple documents, and everything that they built on it, such as sophisticated CSS, JavaScript, was added on at the beginning with the idea of doing something very quickly, and only then it developed into one of the mainstays of computer science. So there are a lot of these things that, in the origin, are absolutely done in the wrong way or in a dumb way or contain some very silly choices, that nobody would have done, including the designers in their right mind, if not that perhaps, they were late on a project, they thought that this was a cute idea, hey, look, this works, and these things were created. We will see that JavaScript was born essentially in 10 hours of work by somebody very good, but it was a language written entirely in 10 hours, right? With all the words and it. I mean, it's still a very nice language. But there is no surprise that, these things have some rough corners. So the civilized way of writing CSS for a computer scientist is to use helper tools. And my favorite one is Compass. Installing Compass, I will post instructions, but it will throw you into a little bit of a loop. But you have it already set up. I will post the instructions, okay? But you have to install some stuff on your laptop to have Compass work, because Compass is written in Ruby. You don't need to know Ruby, but you need to have it installed. So now you know what people spend time on, right? Installing software they don't really need, but that is needed by something else that is needed by what they need. So once my applications are already set up in order to use Compass. And so these lines that now I barbarically wrote here, what I would really do is this. Look a moment in how my files are defined. There is a SAS directory, which obviously was created by a non-British person, that contains myapp.scss and other files.scss. So, myapp.scss, hey, wait, why can't I click there? Oh, because it's open in the other window. Let me close. I don't want to have this multiple window story. Okay. Myapp.scss contains some import definitions. My advice is for you not to touch them until you know better. But essentially, you have various libraries that go with Compass. And here I'm loading a series of libraries that will give me shortcuts. Okay. My advice is don't touch it. The only thing that matters to you is this: import constants and import main. I have a constants file and a main file that are imported and contain my real definitions. So how do those files work? They actually work in a way that is very similar to normal JavaScript, except that you have the sanity of being able to use a scope. You see? You can nest things one inside the other. Here there is, what it says is, everything in the class app, if you find a stop button, then you have to apply this style. And if you look at the way I defined the code, if you look at the way the code is defined, you see, this is a div of class app, and this is something of my text columns. So these definitions will apply. This is very useful because you normally want to scope your definitions, right? For example, especially when we will be building single-page apps, these pages that we build, so to say, will have various sections. There may be a login section, there will be a data output section, maybe there is a chat section, and then we decide which one of the sections to show to the user, right? But there are many pieces that we are designing as part of the UI of an app. And it's very easy as a design method to associate a class with each one of the divs that will contain a section, and then do the styling not globally, but within that section. It's much easier to avoid doing stupid things, so that if you change the size or the color of the buttons in a section, you don't inadvertently change the setting also for all other sections. Okay? So this enables you in a nice way to have a notion of scoping. And the other thing you can do is that you can define constants. For example, we can go into the constants file, and I can define color my orange, and then I can choose an orange color. What would it be? For example, 998800. Is this orange? No. What is it? 993300. To red. 996671. Kind of. Okay, it's not very orange, but let me live with it for the moment. Okay. And I can take this constant that is now defined uniform, and I can say the text in my columns by default has to be color my orange. Okay. Now, if I do this, now this is not CSS. It's this compass input. So the way you translate this into CSS is this: that in the main directory, sorry, let me show you what I'm doing here. I am in the www directory, where there is this config.rb, which is a configuration file for Compass. You don't need to touch it, okay? But if I do compass watch dot, this starts Compass, and Compass will dynamically watch all these files in the SAS directory. Whenever I modify them, let me do a small modification, okay? Instead of 20 pixels, I make these 30 pixels, okay? Compass has detected the change and has automatically generated a new myapp.css. So Compass is constantly watching for file changes and is constantly updating your CSS, okay? And so this is a civilized way, in my opinion, of writing CSS. You can have constants, you can have scoping, and I haven't shown you here, but I can point out to you later, or maybe we will see it in class. We have access to a lot of libraries that enable us to do things that are just plain boring to do in normal CSS. Let me give you a few examples by word, and then maybe we will see them during the class. But for example, you can do things that have rounded corners. It seems simple, but you know, you actually have to produce a little bit of CSS in order to do that, and Compass will take care of it for you. Another thing that is very common to build is color gradations. Very often you want a rectangle not to be of a uniform color, but you want to have some color gradation across it, you know, I don't know, darker at the bottom, whatever. Compass will enable you to define these color gradients very easily. It enables you to do shadows. We could add shadows to the buttons very easily. It enables you to do all those things that actually are really quite boring to do in CSS. So my advice is to look carefully at the starter app. And it depends on your ambition, you know. I will not be testing in this class for installing Compass because I don't want to throw to you yet another thing that you have to install that may be complex to install on your particular laptop. But if you want to be serious in developing something, I very, very highly recommend it for your sanity, okay? Because otherwise, your CSS, since it's unstructured and since it does not have constants, will become, you know, an incredibly long soup of comments that will, you know, cause you to go crazy. You may spend actually more time fighting the CSS than writing the interesting part of your app if you're not careful. Okay, let's continue next time.